Hello and welcome back to Intermediate Writing. This is our last day of lectures, this lecture and the second hour lecture. Last lectures for the semester. Next Monday I will be logged into Zoom for a while in the morning during our class time. You can log in if you want to ask me questions about your assignments. Otherwise that's optional. So remember that your small paragraph assignment is due this weekend, I believe, this weekend. And that's simply talking about revisions that you're going to make, providing me with a list of sources. A fairly easy, straightforward paragraph assignment, which you can then use to build on your essay for the final paper. Again, most of you are going to be revising the midterm, turning it as the final. And the final assignment has been posted. You can post it in the assignment space within a couple of weeks. So today we're going to talk about a little bit about revision, revising samples. First I want to talk about topic sentences a bit, based on an exercise in the book that we didn't get to yet. Then I'm going to actually turn to the exercises that I had you do for a revision exercise, that 15-point Google form exercise that you did a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to talk about that in these lectures today. First, let's talk about topic sentences, and the same applies also to thesis statements. So again, in your intro paragraph, you've got a thesis statement. That's the main idea, the main point, the main objective of the whole paper. Within the body, you have topic sentences within the body paragraphs, and those are usually kind of main supporting arguments to support your thesis. So on page 140, so please refer to page 140 in the book, there are a few just sample topic sentences, just a few to look at today, and take a look at these and tell me what you think. Okay, let's look at the first three. These all have to do with computing technology and computer knowledge. Number one, computer technology has developed very quickly over a short time and is essential nowadays. Would that be useful as a thesis statement or topic sentence? No, this is awfully boring. This is something that a middle school student could write. This is very commonplace knowledge. It's boring. It's uninteresting. As a thesis statement or topic sentence, this is useless. It's hopeless. It's so boring and commonplace. Number two, a person who has strong computer skills can succeed in the modern day world because he can search for information easily and deals with information more effectively. What do you think? It's better. It's one sentence in here that actually can be saved. It's got some problems though. It's a bit kind of vague and unfocused. It's not a very specific or interesting topic for a paper, but as I'll discuss in a few minutes, this one can be revised. There's some hope here. But problems, a person who has, you can just say a person with computer skills, it's more concise. And he can search. Well, do you just mean he? Should avoid gender-biased language. Maybe change it to plural or something, or he or she if you want to sound really, really formal and academic. Search and deal with information. Of course, we all know about information search. That's kind of mundane, but maybe focusing on information management and use as we revise it. So I'll show you in a minute. Number three, information is power. The information, that sounds a bit odd. The information, which information are we talking about? Okay. It's power in the age of technology. A person who has more information can enjoy more success in business. Boring. Okay. You could sort of revise this in a similar way that I will show you for number two in a minute. But this is kind of boring and mundane. It's not very interesting. These, as they are, especially 1 and 3, are just really commonplace statements. Not the sort of thing you would say in a college paper, because a college paper should present some original or interesting information and ideas, and these do not. These are boring. Absolutely boring. Let's go into number 4. You need to know how to use computers in this technology age. Really? Gosh, I didn't know that. That's amazingly insightful. No, it isn't. It's boring. This is just really boring. This is like grade school level. Useless. So throw it out. It's just a comment on the obvious. Number 5, computing skills will be needed more and more. Okay, more and more is kind of colloquial. Increasingly needed, maybe all over the world. Really? All over the world? Not really, not just in this country? Gosh. People who have strong computer skills will increase. What does it mean they will increase? They will get taller? They'll multiply? What does that mean? But as we see, we could maybe fix this in a minute. 6, nowadays the computer? Why the computer? Just, okay. Using the here, like the computer, is more of a literary technique, and it seems maybe you could start an essay like this, but I don't know, it's not really the best way, because you're talking about something obvious. The computer is very useful and necessary, I think a very useful and necessary thing in our life. I think our lives, because we all don't share one collective life. We have lives. Logical plural, we in our lives, because we all have separate lives, so logical plural. Well, we'll just show how a couple of these might be fixed with some considerable rewrites. So these are vague, unfocused, generally not very informative. We can maybe fix a couple of these. For example, number 2, if you change it to those, make it plural to avoid the he and stuff, and that just sounds more general, using plural, like those with advanced computer skills. Okay, and that's better. We're talking about something a little more specific, not just computer skills, but advanced computer skills. Maybe you want to define that. Particular programming skills, AI, programming skills, NLP, natural language processing. That's sort of the area of artificial intelligence research into language and teaching machines to, say, use language interactively with humans or for translation. So you could even improve this more by specifying a particular kind of advanced computer skills like AI or NLP computer skills, or at least programming, particular kind of programming skills. They can succeed in the modern day world as they can easily manage large amounts of information. Okay, this sounds more information. I mean, anybody can search for information, but managing large amounts of information in different kinds of occupations, as an NLP programmer, or creating management software, handling management software in your company, something like that. Sentence number 5, here's how we can improve it. Instead of just computing skills, we could say something more specific, programming skills, or again, maybe even more specific, a particular kind of area of programming skills, or AI programming, or NLP programming skills, for example, are increasingly necessary. Those with strong skills in this and related areas will be competitive in future job markets. And then we're set up to talk about particular kinds of occupations and job markets and skill areas. That would be better. So those are some ideas for revision. So this will help, I think, lead into our next exercise, the revision exercise I had you do for homework in the Google form from page 109, 110 in the book. So the first example was a short paragraph about SNS, the SNS example. The second one was a paragraph about EMI, English Medium Instruction, particularly in Korean universities where college courses are taught in English. So let's talk about the problems with the original paragraphs. These two, both of them. They're both brief and underdeveloped. I mean, each one of them is a big topic, and one paragraph is hardly enough to talk about, well, problems of SNS or problems of EMI. And with SNS, even just the fake news and false information being spread by SNS, that itself is a big topic. And you can't really talk about other problems with SNS here. Nonetheless, these are brief, these are really underdeveloped. One paragraph is not enough to deal with either of these topics. And thus they're unfocused because they try to deal with a big topic in one paragraph, and he can't, so it just jumps around from point to point, never develops any point in satisfying detail, not enough discussion or analysis or explanation of any one point. They're terribly superficial, very superficial, vague, brief, general discussion, a general kind of unfocused, and thus, to some degree or another, the main thesis is lacking. It's not very specific or clear, or clearly stated in any way. Lack of clear and specific main points or main arguments in the whole essay. Some of the points and ideas here, like problems of SNS, they may seem kind of commonplace or vague or obvious or common knowledge. So you need to say more, present more interesting ideas, more detailed explanation of a particular problem, and then specific possible evidence and support, specific evidence for each of these points that you're making, or for proposals. Specific proposals need to be provided, proposals that are not too simplistic. So some of the proposals here seem kind of problematic or simplistic. For example, in the SNS paragraph, talking about government regulation of social media, that's really problematic. You can't just put that out there and not kind of limit or qualify it. What do you mean by government regulation? Well, you can't. It's really problematic if you advocate for the government to directly regulate social media. That's just problematic. In so many countries, in modern countries, it violates people's free speech rights. It's censorship. So censorship, direct regulation of social media, that is highly problematic. So the writer needs to really be careful here and say more carefully what he or she means, and not sound like she's advocating censorship or direct control or direct regulation. That's just not going to work practically or legally. So there need to be proposals that are more specific, better defined proposals that are actually practical and feasible. Evidence and support is needed for these. Any proposals or actions or analysis, they need to be specific, actionable. You can actually act on them and do something, not just something vague like, oh, we need to do something about this, or the government needs to do something about this. You need to provide specific ideas, proposals that are feasible, that is, they can be done, they're practical, they're actionable, you can actually act on them, do something about it specifically. So what do we need to do? Well, for each one of these, we're going to have to break up the paragraph really into separate paragraphs. In other words, each paragraph is going to have to be expanded into at least a short essay. It's going to have to be broken up and developed in much more detail. Each part needs to be developed in more detail. More parts need to be added too. The structure can be revised and reorganized so that overall it's more specific and focused. So like a more specific idea of what can be done about false information in SNS, or about EMI implementation in Korea. Let's focus on Korea, not just anywhere. You can focus on EMI in lots of countries. It's a global phenomenon. Let's focus on Korea. Let's make it doable and manageable for one essay. So you need more carefully thought out thesis, maybe an outline of the main points, and thus the topic sentences. The main points lead to topic sentences, as each main point in the body supporting a main supporting point that supports the thesis will translate to a topic sentence in a body paragraph, usually. So that needs to be carefully sketched out and developed. Then more specific informative contents, not just vague general statements that are common knowledge, but more specific information like from research, from data, from news sources about the problem or about the ideas being proposed. Specific arguments and ideas need to be developed. That is something that's clear and specific. You're like, oh yeah, I can see what you mean. That's how you do it. Counter-argumentation. So in some points, counter-arguments need to be considered. If the writer says, hey, let's do this, the writers may be proposing something that's problematic or controversial, Or a reader will go, hey, I don't agree with you. Well, that needs to be anticipated and dealt with. For example, when the writer is proposing government action on SNS, on false information in SNS, that's problematic. The writer needs to consider possible criticism and modify his or her proposals or ideas in a way that's taking into consideration possible problems, possible objections. So proposals that are feasible, that are doable or practical, or at least specific, you can say, oh yeah, I see what you mean. If the point of the essay is to make proposals, say solutions. And again, all of this evidence and support and sources are necessary. Whether it's evidence for the nature of the problem or citing examples of hey, this is how Finland did it. This is how Finland has tried to address this problem. And I can cite, some information from news sources or research data about what Finland has done in their education system. See, the Finnish government, they've been doing it successfully. Let me tell you about it. I'll cite that as an example in a few minutes. This university has done EMI this way and it's worked, or it's failed badly. Cite examples and then provide sources. Provide reference citations for your sources in the body, and then provide the full information in the work cited or in the references at the end of the paper. So in general, that's what we need to do. So now let me go through each of these paragraphs and show you more specifically, kind of sketch out some ideas. So some of you had some good ideas in your homework, and I'm going to kind of show you how I might do it. It's not the only way, but what I think is a good way to go about taking these relatively poor paragraphs and turning them into something more useful for a college paper. So I'll go to my computer and we'll take a look. I'll walk you through it. All right, here's the first one on social media. It's a short paragraph. So first I'm going to decide where I'm going to break it up. The first part is kind of an intro. Let's see, social media promoted false myths. Okay, that's this part here. Social media have promoted false beliefs. I'm going to turn that into kind of a background section. So the first part is going to become my intro paragraph. The second part will be a background section where I explain more about the problem. Then this one, government regulation. This is going to be turned into the first actual body section and cut it here where the next section talks about education. Popularity of social media. Okay, I can make this a bit more concise because I'm really just going to focus on misinformation and misconceptions. I'm not going to talk about other possible problems, and there are many with social media. I'm not going to talk about that. So particularly, and maybe I can make this flow a little bit better, such as fake news and conspiracy theories. Okay, I'm going to add to this later. Another part down here, government regulation are not desirable. It makes it sound like I'm advocating censorship. And actually, I don't want to sound like I am promoting censorship or direct government regulation of the internet or social media. I'm going to that needs to be reworded a lot. That needs to be changed a lot. So what I'm going to do next is going to make an outline. So, and I'm going to formulate a more specific thesis statement. So the thesis is going to be this. Governments of various countries need to respond to this problem partly via indirect legal means, but primarily by educating the public. So that's going to be part of the intro paragraph. And then after the intro paragraph, I'm going to have a background section, a background paragraph. So you can do this sometimes in academic writing. You can have your intro section, but before you get to the body, you can have a background paragraph that explains more in detail the problem or the issue, which can kind of set the stage for the actual main points in the body. So In this background paragraph, I'm going to talk about specific effects of misinformation. Government, distrust of government, promoting extremist behavior, possibly even social disorder, like when extremists think that an election has been rigged and they converge on maybe some place where votes are being counted and they start a riot. That has happened recently. And then the fast spread of false information, and there are actually real examples and some data to back that up. The next paragraph, the first body paragraph, is going to be about government response, more direct government response, laws against spreading information. So I need to consider possible objections or counter-arguments from a reader. Typical readers are going to think, what? You want the government to censor people? You want the government to regulate the internet? No. So we want to be careful not to sound like we are for that kind of thing. So instead, we want to carefully talk about very measured, careful government responses that do not involve censorship or directly regulating the internet or violating people's civil liberties, their rights to express themselves, their right to free speech and free association, to associate with other fellow like-minded crazy people. They have the right. Crazy people have the right to be with other crazy people. Okay, that's the right. I'm not going to touch that. So instead, one thing is we're going to talk about laws against deliberately spreading misinformation. Now, I have to say deliberately because you can't just make laws against spreading misinformation, because unfortunately a lot of people who do that on Facebook and such, on Twitter, really believe the nonsense that they are spreading. They really believe it, so you can't really, that falls within the domain of free speech. They have free speech to say whatever nonsensical or crazy things they believe in and want to say. They have that right. So instead, what we want to do, where we could put limits, is statements, false information that has malicious intent. Malicious means the person actually knows it's wrong and they're trying to cause harm or disruption. So you could formulate laws against deliberately and maliciously making up or spreading false information, because there are, I think, similar laws in that regulate other kinds of media, like print media. Newspapers can't just make up false rumors about a person. If they do, they will get sued. Well, you could make laws that define malicious intent, harmful intent to do something wrong or harmful, specifying either penalties or at least just making the person open to lawsuits from other groups that care about this. That's how one way you might regulate this. And this could apply domestically within the country, such that maybe a person is liable to small fines or at least just getting sued by other groups. You could also include maybe people from other countries, especially if they are working on behalf of a foreign government. So an international aspect. And that would apply, for example, to say a group that the Russian government has promoted to create false memes and spread false information in Facebook, to create social division, misunderstandings, false information, false memes that get spread through Facebook have been created by, was it the Internet Research Agency or something? It's which is somehow sponsored or set up or promoted by the Russian government to spread false information about within the U.S. about American politics. So we would create some legal mechanisms for going after those people. And so that would actually be, I'll put that under here, laws against spreading false information. Next, government responses to particular rumors. So then the governments around the world should take more active roles sometimes in responding to particular internet rumors and fake news and conspiracy theories, directly countering them, responding to them, and sometimes also through government and public pressure on media companies, SNS companies. Similar things have worked in the past where, say, instead of just outlawing something, the US Congress, for example, has held hearings, public hearings, called in, say, CEOs of music companies or media companies about a problem and put pressure on them and call public attention to them. So government and public pressure on SNS companies so that they will regulate their own platforms. And that's much more effective than the government trying to regulate YouTube. Instead, the government draws attention, puts pressure on them, and YouTube and Facebook go, okay, we're going to regulate our content better. Next paragraph, I'm going to talk about education. And actually, I'm probably going to divide this up into at least 2 paragraphs, which may not be reflected in the outline. In order to talk about education, I first want to talk about the general goals. What kind of education do we need? Well, this kind of education skills and goals need to be promoted among the public. And this would be multiple governments, local, state, national governments in different countries. Media literacy, being aware of how to recognize fake news, fake rumors and such, how to check things out, how to check out false stories. Critical thinking skills that people need, awareness of fallacies or false logic, cognitive biases. The reason why people might fall for false information is because it appeals to certain psychological biases we have. People like easy explanations for complicated events, complicated situations. People like the conspiracy theory, as crazy it is, because for them it gives them meaning. It helps them to make sense of things and makes them feel like, oh, I understand something. It makes them feel special or important. And that leads into psychological appeals of false information and conspiracy theories. By the way, the cognitive biases, they're biases involving information. Like people see a lot of information, they can't handle it. Well, a conspiracy theory is a nice convenient explanation for a whole bunch of data that they can't make sense of. So it provides easy explanations. Another kind of skill is science education. People need science awareness, especially in schools. They hear things in the media, on the internet. It could be something seemingly harmless, like, oh, the latest study says this is good for you, this is bad for you, and that's wrong. That's media misreporting science and health news. As well as awareness of pseudoscience. What is pseudoscience? What is real science? Why is it that an average, uneducated person on the internet doesn't have credibility in challenging the conclusions of the majority of the scientific community? There are reasons for that. So people need to understand science. So then particular education programs, this would probably be a separate paragraph, at least one separate paragraph, where you're talking about some of these programs that could be done in secondary education, middle school and high school. And there I'm probably going to want to cite particular examples, like in Finland, where Finland has undertaken some media literacy programs in its high schools, I think. Tertiary education, so how it can be addressed in some college classes. And certain kinds of college classes need to address this. Then public awareness education, so maybe this is through media campaigns sponsored by governments on TV and internet, Facebook, YouTube. Some media campaigns to educate the public about fake news and pseudoscience and such. So for each of these, I'm going to need to come up with a topic sentence. So let's do that. Okay, so I've created topic sentences. These are going to be the main idea sentences of the body paragraphs. So all of the topic sentences support the main thesis. Okay. So government response, I've got a topic sentence about the government response. I've got one topic sentence about education, educational goals, and another topic sentence about educational programs. Next, I need to put some of these contents into the paragraph. So I pasted the thesis into the intro paragraph. Maybe I need to add a little bit more to make kind of a transition. Such false information can be harmful to modern democracy and social order. And then I'm going to actually expand on that more in the background paragraph here. And here I'm going to talk about some of the problems here. So negative effects of information. That's going to go in here, my background paragraph. I'm going to turn these into sentences. And then I'm going to expand on that, and I'm going to add a source. I'm going to maybe cite actual examples. So, and I'm going to put in at least one source, for example, a newspaper article or such about particular examples. So something like that. I'm going to cite a source, and then that's going to later be in my works cited. I'm going to have a works cited section later on where I will put this information. Conspiracy theories. This is a real story. It happened a few years ago. Man with a rifle attempted to take over a pizza restaurant because he thought there was a child trafficking ring in the basement of the restaurant. And this is actually popular known. Maybe I don't need to cite it if the readers are Americans. They might know this, but for non-Americans, I'm going to cite, let's see, so I'm citing an article, and it's going to go in my works cited later on. I'm also going to talk about, these have shown that, and here I'm going to cite a source for that. So I've cited a source. And again, for the next one, government regulation. So this one needs to be changed quite a bit. And I'm actually going to really, any form of government regulation. Internet is usually capitalized in formal English. Use however. So I'm kind of mitigating any potential misconceptions people might have about what I mean. Individual can pass with the however. So here I'm mitigating any wrong impressions people might think, any objections they might have. I'm going to say we're going to be careful. We're not going to impinge on any free speech rights or other individual liberties. However, individual countries can pause on penalties on its citizens who knowingly, we have to say knowingly, promote false and harmful information. So here I need to probably expand it with some more explanation and examples. So examples of particular laws, and then I'm going to cite them. Then I'll talk about how governments can put public pressure, and I will cite particular examples, and I will cite them. I will cite particular examples in the past where governments have done this, and it has worked, especially, for example, in the American media context where Congress held public hearings which put pressure on media companies to regulate some of their content, or music companies to maybe label their content more clearly for the sake of parents. There are a number of historical examples I can cite for that. Okay, going on to education and awareness. I'm going to talk again about this. Education and awareness are needed. That's kind of a weak statement. It's not very clear. It's not a very clear statement. What exactly do you want? Well, I want to say that governments should mandate particular education programs in the public schools. So I'm going to do that here. And I'm going to cite, I'm going to talk about the general goals of this as I discussed here below. I'm going to talk about media literacy, and I will cite from maybe a news article or magazine article a particular example, like in Finland, what Finland has done with teaching media literacy in schools, what other particular school systems have done with teaching critical thinking skills. I will cite specific examples. I'll then talk about science education. This is all going to go into the body of the paragraph. For now, I'll just dump my outline in here. Well, I would put in here. I kind of have some of the content. Then I need to add another paragraph where these need to be implemented in various programs in secondary, tertiary education in different countries and media campaigns. And then I'm going to expand on it in cite. So I'm going to cite examples or cite reasons from good sources for these. And as you can see, this is probably going to go into a fairly lengthy essay, multiple pages. Each of these paragraphs still needs to be expanded. The background paragraph needs to be expanded with more explanation, more details, more support, more evidence. When I talk about government responses, more indirect legal responses, I need more evidence and more explanation, more sources here, and I would go on to do that. When I talk about general education goals, I'm going to maybe cite examples, cite sources for why that is, and particular kinds of media literacy and logical skills, logical critical thinking skills that are needed. Then especially in the next paragraph, these educational efforts need to be implemented through secondary, tertiary education. There definitely I'm going to cite sources, again like the Finland example, other examples, media campaigns, and explain why this would work. So notice these are all specific feasible solutions or proposals. Each idea here is a specific proposal or idea that can actually be implemented without much problem. And any possible objections I've addressed and taken care of, or will have taken care of in these paragraphs. Of course, this paragraph in particular needs a lot more development. I need a lot more sources, a lot more content in this paragraph. Then I'm going to have the works cited where I give the full details of all of these sources. So in doing so, I have addressed the problems. I've made it more focused, more specific. I've given it more direction. I have a specific thesis in the intro. I have specific main points in the body paragraphs, like here, and here, and here. And I've started working on developing specific contents, much more support and evidence, and specific feasible proposals or ideas for addressing these problems, for addressing these issues. Last thing would be, of course, a conclusion. So in sum, something like that, and I would kind of summarize my main idea and maybe add a little bit about implications. This will lead to a much better informed citizens and a healthier democracy, a healthier society, something like that as my conclusion. That's what needs to be done with this particular paragraph. So in the next video, I will talk more about the next paragraph on EMI and what needs to be done and how to fix it, and I'll make a few other points, talk about a few other points in the next video. All right, see you in the next one. Bye.